Hello, my name is Jim Cracchiolo, and I'm the Director of Learning Your Function Incorporated, also known as Life Inc. Today, we are going to talk about core assurances, do the core assurances training. We'll also ask you to complete your comprehension guide, and if you wanted to access that now, it would be a good time. It's best if you take out the comprehension guide on your computer and fill it out as we go along in the PowerPoint presentation. Overall, this presentation shouldn't be more than 30 minutes, and it's pretty directly related to your comprehension guide. So with no further ado, let me share the screen. And we will get right to it. At this point, you can see my screen. I get full screen. We're going to talk about core assurances. Basically, this is a handbook overview for new staff, and we'll get into what all that means in just a minute. So core assurances are those most basic things that we guarantee, the basic guarantees, the core assurances. And those basic things are found in the handbook. Instead of handing you the handbook, which is 100 pages long or so, we go and we touch on very specific items so that you can better understand what it is our expectations for you and our mandates really from Medicaid to perform the tasks that we do and get paid for them. So overall, the Developmental Disabilities Individual Budgeting Waiver Services Coverage and Limitations Handbook, that's the large name for it, but it's also known as the iBudget Handbook. The most recent edition is May of 2023. And that's the one that we'll be utilizing for this and future exams. Outlines expectations for all service providers, agencies, and individual providers. In our world, we have agencies. So Life Inc. is an agency. And then so we work with many staff and many students. There are different expectations for agencies as there are for individual providers. An individual provider is if you were to go and help somebody do companion services or respite or things like that in an individual standpoint. You don't have employees. You are just acting as an individual provider. So there's a difference there, and the handbook outlines the different expectations that there are for those different providers. It also defines mandatory documentation for all the different services. Like I said, there's over 100 pages in the handbook. Our section, which is life, like the service that we provide, as you can see on the next bullet point, Life Skills Development 3 or Adult Day Training, we only adhere to those expectations in the handbook. We do not have to fulfill the same expectations as, say, a group home or a different provider. So the documentation that we have to provide is outlined in the handbook and the expectations, and that changes from time to time, and we have to be aware of that. That's not something that impacts you so much, but does impact us. The training touches on important sections that pertain to LSD3. So these are, this is the snapshot of just that section. There are many sections in the handbook, and we are going to be discussing just those that pertain to us. Some of them have some overlap, but some of the LSD3 things are just basically our thing. Please have your core assurances comprehension check and use it while watching this training. You should have been sent that via an email, and it's helpful. Instead of having to go back and search for answers, they have it right with you, like I had mentioned before. And fill in those answers while we're listening to the presentation. Pretty straightforward, and here we go. The first, I'm sorry about that. The first slide that we have here is about implementation plans. What is an implementation plan? And it's pretty simple. An implementation plan utilizes the student's support plan, and it outlines the student's specific goals. Each student is given goals by their team. Sometimes we are included in that. Sometimes people forget to include us, but that's okay. We still are included in the goal section. We are responsible for certain goals, and that helps create accountability. If we weren't responsible for anything, then the service that we provide is unneeded, basically. So the goal is there. We adhere to that goal, and we are given those goals sometimes by the support plan. We create the implementation plan. You don't create it. You don't have to monitor it. You don't have to amend it or alter it. But the goals of the students should be accompanied by how they will work towards the goal and how the progress will be measured. So not only is it a question of what is the goal, but then also the measuring of the goal and what we'll do to work towards it. So this is a direct excerpt from the handbook. So if you're looking for a definition of implementation plan, it is a plan developed by the provider with direction from the recipient and includes the name of the recipient receiving services. The implementation plan details the support plan goals that the service will address, the methods employed to assist the recipient in meeting the support plan goals, and the system to be used for data collection and assessing recipients' progress in achieving the support plan goals. That is directly out of the handbook, a little bit of a run-on sentence, but you get the gist. I broke it down for you up top. Let's head on to the next section here. A person-centered approach. So person-centered approach, direct from the handbook again, is a planning approach based on the recipient's perspective rather than that of a program or resource used to identify the service and supports necessary to meet the recipient's needs, involving the recipient and significant people in the recipient's life. The most important goals and outcomes are identified as well as the supports needed to achieve them. So what does all this mean? Basically, you're utilizing the student's view as the primary view when making decisions for that student. If the student is interested in something specific, then it's important to try to include that in their day as we can as an adult day training. If the individual is really into, let's say, cars, vehicles, et cetera, and one of their goals happens to be that they will involve some type of work within that or knowledge, learning that has to do with mechanics or things like that. Those are items that we can provide them at some of our campuses. I just took a couple students out to go and get a battery checked at Advanced Auto Parts. So that involves those students in an on-the-job training or an interest-based kind of perspective, person-centered. Overall, the goal is not to have people come here and fit into our square hole. They talk about the square pegs and the round holes and all these other things. The goal is to shape the program around the individuals that we serve, and we've done that throughout the years that we've been in service. Remembering the student's interests, needs, aspiration, and choices, and I think the main one on there is choices. There are some individuals that have interest in doing different things, but also their choice within the things that we offer are really important. And that's one nice thing about Life Inc. is that we typically have a decent amount of choices. When it comes down to the individual, they really ultimately have the choice whether to participate in those things or not. We can document whether they're doing that so that we don't have a difficulty explaining as to why a person might be lacking progress if they choose not to involve themselves in a lot of activities. But it is best interest in the individual and in Life Inc. to try to make those options palpable for that student and get them, to make themselves available and engage in the different activities that we do. It's very important when having to make decisions on how to implement curriculum accommodations and modifications in your classroom. If we're noticing our students' needs, we're going to utilize the person-centered approach to do that. If there is an interest that they have, maybe they gain access to that interest if it's an appropriate one, after they complete the expectations that we have for them. And that's going to really, reinforce them to continue to partake in the opportunities that we have at Life Inc. Critical events, we're going to do one slide on critical events and one slide on reportable events. Either or can go in your comprehension check. I know there's 8 down there, and there's more than 8 between the critical and the reportable. The difference between critical and reportable: critical incident categories must be reported within an hour to APD. If any of these things happen in your classroom, obviously we're going to probably have a little bit of scope into that. You're going to let us know administratively, your campus director, your resource, et cetera, and we're going to troubleshoot. We're going to make the best out of it that we can, and we're going to work towards it. But these are the critical events that APD must know about within an hour, or we can basically get in trouble. So a covered person arrest, a covered person would be any staff member. So if they get arrested, we have to go ahead and remove them from our roster and see what the situation is all about. If it's one of those situations that the individual can no longer work for us, then that's something that we have to do. We typically, and we'll talk about this when we talk about background check screenings and things, we typically get an email if anybody is involved with law enforcement. Once you do your level 2 background check, we get that as a direct connection, that email, and that will tell us if there's an issue. If there's something that kind of went underneath the radar, we should know about it. And if you know anything about that, you should let us know, please. Life-threatening injury or illness that is to a not a staff member, but to a student or consumer. If at the day program something like that happens, obviously we will have to do what we need to do that's medically necessary first, and then we will go ahead and make sure that that critical incident report is filled out and sent to APD so they can be aware. Media involvement, so that's just any action, any situation that involves negative media involvement. We don't have to let them know about all of our positive ones. We've had several of those involving Canines for Christ or different things like that. But if there's any potential negative media involvement, they want to know about it. A missing child or adjudicated incompetent adult that is for over an hour. The individual is missing for over an hour. We need to let them know. Obviously, we will be doing a lot of things if an individual goes missing. Going back to, when we try to generate safety, it's really, really important to keep track of your students. And again, try not to lose many of them. That's something that happens infrequently. But once in a while, because we deal with the students that we deal with, even if it's a student who was picked up by a therapist and brought to a different area of the campus, it's important to voice when you are not supervising somebody, when somebody's out of supervision site, so that we can be aware of what's going on. Any sexual misconduct, I really won't go into great depth of that, but that's basically between any unwanted. So it could be consumer on consumer, or it could be staff on consumer. So that's something that we have to make them aware of within an hour. Unexpected resident or client death. So that's an unexpected one. We'll go into with a reportable event, an expected resident or client death. But this is something that a heart attack, a stroke, something that happens from an accident, those types of things. We need to make sure that we report those within an hour to APD. Thankfully, nothing we've had to do in the past. Hopefully something we don't have to do in the future. Verified abuse reports. So that goes through a process. An abuse report, once it's verified, we do have to let APD know once we're made aware. Sometimes we aren't made aware. So we just kind of keep our ears to the ground. That's one that probably you won't be dealing with as much as we will as administration, but something to keep an ear out for. And violent crime arrest. So that is something that if there is a violent crime that occurs off campus that we know of, on campus, God forbid, then it's something that we have to make APD aware of. Reportable events are reported within 1 business day. And again, something else that you really won't be involved in, maybe giving us the information, but we typically will write up the APD incident reports. They go in a very specific form. And so those are things that we basically take care of, but it's very important for you to understand what these are. An altercation, so that could be a fight between a student and a student, a staff and a student. Could be either way, but the altercation is not just one that is a quick spat. It's more involving law enforcement or any type of medical help. So that would be considered an altercation and need an incident report. A Baker Act, we don't do too many of those, but when an individual is Baker acted, we have to do a incident report within a day. An ER visit or hospitalization, that can be from a simple accident, something somebody tripped, fell, et cetera, et cetera. So that's something that we do an incident report for. An expected resident or client's death, again, hope not to do those in the future. But if that's something we have to do, it really won't happen as much on our property. If a person is declining in health, which has happened in the past at our programs, if they've declined in health over time, they typically go to some type of residential placement, something as intense as hospice, or something as not intense as just their group home, or with family or whatnot. So that's something that we don't deal with too often. A missing competent adult, and that I believe is after 8 hours. So a person who has their legal rights has the ability to go where they please, but if they are not reporting back to where they should be after 8 hours, then they are considered missing. A nonviolent crime arrest, I think those are involving like drug offenses and stealing, things like that. So again, we have to make them aware of those types of actions. A resident or client injury, that is not just a scrape or a bruise. That is something that again requires some type of medical attention, an ER visit, even an urgent care. That's an injury that's a little bit more than just a typical injury. Somebody cuts themselves in the kitchen, or scrapes their knee, or picks a scab. That's not something that we have to report to APD. And last but not least, a suicide attempt. I guess that goes without saying, another one that we haven't had to do, but hopefully we won't have to do in the future. We also have internal incident reports. So those are things that don't meet the qualifications of any of the two things that you just saw between critical and reportable events. So those internal incident reports are ones that you can get from your campus director. And it's always good to document things. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. But things that aren't as serious as the APD mandated ones, things that we still will document for on-campus purposes, get a copy to the parent or the group home, et cetera, et cetera. Abuse reporting. So right off the bat, who do we report abuse to? That is 1-800-96-ABUSE. That is the abuse hotline. Sometimes in these presentations, people will say, you report it to me or a campus director. That's nice. We appreciate that. It is not necessary. If it involves a student that we know, chances are we're going to be involved with either law enforcement or child protective services or adult protective services. So in that case, it's appreciated that we know about it beforehand, because we'll be seeing them in the next couple of days after it's reported. But basically, your responsibility as a lifing staff is knowing the status of your students, knowing how they came in. We had an individual just a couple of days ago who came in with a large bruise on their arm. I asked the teacher as I saw the student come in, hey, was this here the day before? She said, yes, the student actually was at the hospital and that was made by an IV. And so it made sense that young lady had a bruise on their arm. And it's not something that we necessarily have to document. But when you do see a change, whether it's a simple bruise or a scratch or things like that, it's always good to just take a picture to document those things. Documentation now is as simple as ever. You literally go on your phone, click a couple buttons, and point and click. If you have that picture, that's already a timestamp. That is everything you need in order to address the issue if it were to come up. And the reason why is because we've had that happen before, where group homes will come to us and say, oh, so-and-so came home with this bruise, even if we saw it in the morning. Seeing it in the morning is about as good as talking about it, which is not anywhere near as good as having a picture that says at 8:30 in the morning when they were dropped off, this was already there. So that's a nice piece that we have now that we didn't have in the past, and something that just get used to doing it. It's worth it. Worst case scenario is you erase the photo and it's gone. So mandatory reporting as a LifeInc staff. Uh, it's very important to understand that we are mandatory reporters. If you feel as though a student is in an unsafe situation involving abuse, neglect, or exploitation, and that could be on our campus or off, it must be investigated. There have been times where individuals have come in and we have called the abuse hotline because we feel as though that person had something done to them that wasn't either necessary and or plausible. There are times that individuals have come to us with a scratch or a bruise, and maybe they are behaviorally aggressive. So it makes a little bit more sense. We might just ask the question to the group home, hey, what happened? And they give us an explanation. If that explanation, again, seems plausible, then we go with it. We understand if it's something that happens over and over and over again, something that we want to be aware of. But typically, we're going to see that same type of behavior at our program. So we're going to get to know our students, knowing the status of your students. We're going to document when we see a change. And if we have to report something, we will. Zero Tolerance is a web-based course. It's mandated for all staff, so you probably already took that or are about to take it. It outlines all of the important aspects of abuse reporting. So pay attention to that, and you'll know. You'll just know when it's time. There have been times that I've called the abuse hotline, and the abuse hotline has said that's not abuse. So I do that based on my gut feeling, and when it's time, and you'll know. Valued social roles. So valued social roles are it sounds like a really complicated definition, and it really isn't. And I think the reason why it's brought up in the handbook and past handbooks is because the view that we have of our students is very, very important. Oftentimes, our students are viewed as non-essential, non-contributing members of society. And so it's very, very important to understand that it's part of our job to create these valued social roles within their reputation. And so, very simply, a valued social role is a role in society that has a positive reputation and is viewed by onlookers as worthy. Some of those examples might be neighbor, friend, parishioner, volunteer, student. Those are some basic ones. Any occupation that's seen as a positive thing. But a lot of our students are typically labeled with lesser examples of valued social roles, like a non-valued social role, things like handicapped, wheelchair bound, disabled, or retarded. And it's important to understand that while those terms may have been used in the past to describe something about them, retarded just means slow, disabled, they can't do something. The goal really is to kind of turn that definition on its head and to attempt to find worth within the individuals that we serve. It's extremely important. And when you do that, they benefit just as much as we benefit from working with them. We see them as people who can achieve things as opposed to individuals who cannot. And they see themselves as people who can be successful. So valued social role is very important. Background screening requirements. There are 2 background screening requirements to work at LifeInc. You guys probably have already gone through them or are about to. That level 2 background screening is the first background screening requirement. It's completed every 5 years. It's very comprehensive. It goes throughout the country, and it's also multi-organizational. So that is federal crimes, local crimes, all of those things, different jurisdictions. So very, very, very comprehensive. That's done through live scan fingerprinting. You will go to a facility to do that, sometimes a post office, and there are different live scan offices available. That service is very specific. Whereas a local background screening is something that we could typically do over the phone for you with some of your information. We utilize your driver's license, and it basically detects those more recent infractions, those things that you may have been pulled over for a parking ticket. We might see that on a local if it was recent. You might be pulled over. You might a failure to show up in court, things like that. Those are going to show up. If you did that within the last week, we're going to know about it on a local background check. Don't do any of those things. We have record keeping and marketing guidelines. Very simple. The records of students are to be kept for 5 years, and after 5 years, we are to destroy those things with HIPAA regulations. So basically, we are in charge of all that. Sometimes you'll produce that documentation for us, and we appreciate that. But it is our job to maintain those records. Very soon, we'll be utilizing the iConnect, and so with that, everything will be stored online in a very secure spot, and so it will be pretty easy to do that for 5 years. We used to do it with paper. Now we're doing online. So LifeInc cannot advertise or market. So marketing guidelines, interestingly enough, we as a business, we're not allowed to advertise our med waiver services in the traditional sense. Not allowed to solicit potential students. So if we know that somebody lives down the street, if we were to go up to them and try to sell them on our program, we could actually get in trouble. That doesn't mean that other people can't do it. So word of mouth, support coordinators, parents, behavior analysts, things like that, when they speak to our program and the positive things that happen at it, that's totally cool and totally within the rules. So that works out very well. Recoupment. Recoupment of funds is not a good thing. Basically, the definition of recoupment is the paying back of funds provided by Florida Medicaid because of non-adherence to some handbook stipulation. So if we don't follow the rules in the handbook, then it is on us. We already paid you payroll. We already paid for the rent and the insurance. We already paid for the transportation, the gas, and the insurance and the vehicles and all those. We paid for all those things. But if at the end of the day, and again, they can go back 5 years, if we aren't doing what we should be doing with employee files or with student files, then they can take that money back forcibly. So that's something that we don't like to do, and we try to reduce that by following the rules, having the right documentation. So when we ask staff to complete documentation, we promise there's a reason behind it. It's not just that we want to put you through more work or painstaking effort. We want you to document because we need the documentation. And please, when you do that documentation, that you have it completed in those scheduled timeframes that we set forth. The reason for that is because you're not the only staff completing documentation. A lot of times we'll take the documentation that you provide to us and we will utilize that in other documents that we have to create in order to stay in compliance. So we appreciate you guys doing that and fulfilling those documentation requirements on time. And last but not least, we have HIPAA guidelines. Basically, HIPAA is a very dense and very stringent law. If you want to read through the whole thing, that's fine. There is a training that you have to take about HIPAA, but it's hard to get through, to be honest with you. And so basically, we've broken it down into three very, very important pieces that totally apply to what it is that you're doing. Basically, you are not to share personal identification information with anyone outside the student's team. That is their name, address, phone number, social security number, all of those identifying informations, birthday, et cetera, et cetera. If you want to tell a story about a student, which is perfectly fine, don't use their name, use a different name. Our guys are amazing and they do a lot of great things, and we want to share some of the things that they do, and that can be done totally legally and so that you don't get into trouble. Go ahead and just change your name or don't use their name, and tell them the story because it's worth spreading some exciting, funny stories and some accomplishing stories about our students. You are not to share medical history information with anyone outside of the student's team. That includes things like their diagnosis. Maybe they just changed medication. Maybe they have a situation where they just got COVID or were in a hospital for some surgery. Those are things that stay private with you. It's good that you know them so that you can have that person-centered approach and modify things as need be for them to be involved in the activities that we provide. But not sharing it with other people, very, very important. You are not to share photo, video, or personal likeness with anyone outside of the student's team. So that involves, sometimes you want to take a picture with a student, things like that. I will say that some students who have their rights, who are deemed competent, they can choose to take a picture with you or not. It's a unsteady road, but I'll tell you that to make it really easy, we, I think, have on the majority of students that we serve video and photo releases. And so what that means is that we have the ability to share that information and use it for our own use. And so when we put things on Facebook, that's totally granted to us from the individuals or their parents or their guardians. If there's a picture that you're just dying to post online on social media, give it to us. And if it's something that we can put online, we will. And then once you share it, it came from us. So that will help you get through that angst of not being able to share that with a workplace fun or that student that you just, really take to. Overall, not adhering to the HIPAA guidelines can result in major consequences out of the jurisdiction of Life Inc. And what that basically means is that we won't have control over the consequences that could potentially come your way if there's a HIPAA violation. You need to watch yourself. This is things like being at a restaurant and overhearing a conversation between somebody complaining about a student or their behaviors or things like that. Once they use their name, it's it's fodder for the HIPAA police. And I suggest that you just watch how you do it. I know that in the 20 plus years I've been doing this, I've always just diverted the name or I love telling stories about the guys and things like that. So overall, if you please don't find yourself in that situation, because again, it really won't be up to me or the administration at Life Inc. to help you or not help you in that situation. So I don't also want you to lose any potential job with us or a future position at any other program or provider. So thank you for not doing that. In conclusion, we went over all the handbook, and you can access the handbook at apdcares.org or just Google search Florida Medicaid Waiver Handbook. You should get the most recent edition that is May 2023. Pretty easy to access if there's anything that you wanted to see. Staff expectations stem from handbook requirements. The things that we're asking you to do, again, there's not a reason that we say, hey, we really want you to go out of your way and create these activities for these students and blah, 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 blah. Instead of, that there's a reason for that. It's in the handbook. We want you to do it because we need to engage students throughout the day. It's very, very important for them to achieve their goals and things like that. So for the most part, it is our job to make Life Inc. the vehicle so that they can attain those things. So we need to make sure that when those expectations are set forth, they're completed. There's a reason for it, and it's not just lip service. So we appreciate that. Any questions that you have, feel free to reach out to any knowledgeable staff. Some of the campus directors are versed in some of those pieces. The intercampus coordinator, that's Ms. Natalie, and the directors, Amy and Jim. Feel free to give me a call anytime, 813-469-2455, or you can contact me at jc@lifeinc.com. I hope you have a great day. Thank you so much for staying tuned and staying alert. Hopefully your entire comprehension check is completed at this point. And again, we really appreciate everything you do for the students here at Life Inc. Have a great day.